Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Information Week webinar, DevOps on Day 2. It's sponsored by Interop ITX and broadcast by UBM. I'm Peter Krass with Information Week, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I have a few quick announcements. First, this webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speaker, download resources, and share this webinar via social media. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. Also, you can download a copy of the slides, and you do that with the Resources widget. Toward the end of the webinar, we'll ask you to complete a survey found on the right hand of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this survey out before you leave us today. Your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. And finally, if you have any technical problems during this webinar, please click on the Help widget that's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be glad to help you. Now let's get started with our presentation, DevOps on Day 2. Discussing today's topic, we have Jayne Groll. She's co-founder and CEO of the DevOps Institute. Jayne's career spans more than 25 years in senior IT management roles across a wide range of industries. She's active in the DevOps, ITSM, Agile, and DevOps communities. She's also the author of the Agile Service Management Guide and a frequent presenter at local, national, and virtual events. Jayne, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Peter, and welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk a lot about DevOps, not only from the what is DevOps and why it's important now, but really the evolution to what is DevOps to how do we actually do it. We're going to talk about some very high-level DevOps practices and principles, and then at the end I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak preview of the sessions that are going to be in the DevOps Track at Interop ITX 2018. So one of the interesting things about DevOps is that there are many definitions and interpretations of what DevOps is and what it isn't. At DevOps Institute, we prefer the definition that's been growing organically through Wikipedia, and that's that DevOps is first and foremost a cultural and a professional movement. It does stress communication, collaboration, and integration between people. And those people make up the software developers, the IT operations professionals, and security professionals and others in the IT value stream. And then DevOps also encourages the automation of as much of the process of software delivery and infrastructure changes as is reasonable and possible in your organization. If you look at the second paragraph, I find that particularly interesting because DevOps is really aiming at establishing a new type of culture, right? People first. And it's an environment where building, testing, and releasing software can happen rapidly, can happen frequently, and your infrastructure and your production environment can be much more reliable. The goal is to be able to deliver value to customers faster. So why is DevOps important now? Well, if you start to look at the competitive landscape, it's really different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where most enterprise had competition in similar types of enterprise organization. But today, the competitor may be a very nimble, agile startup. It may be some kid sitting in a garage writing the world's greatest app. And so enterprises are having to manage their own offerings to meet the demands of a very disruptive market. If we also look at agile software development and its rise to replace waterfall development in most organizations and cloud infrastructure starting to very rapidly replace on-premises hybrid infrastructure, then that also is shaping the need for a faster, more frequent flow of work as well. The net result is IT can no longer operate in a silo culture, and more organizations are making the move to the cloud. Your consumers, whether it's you personally or whether it's your customers, now have app mentalities where updates happen magically, they happen overnight, and the system or the device is not taken down while that update occurring. There's much more data available to the business, and therefore time to market, time to value has to increase in order to meet the current demands of a modern market. So to meet these changing conditions, IT really has to adapt its culture. It has to adapt its practices. It needs to automate more of its processes. And at the end, it just needs to be more continuous. So the other question that I'm frequently asked is, what makes DevOps so unique? Is it better than Scrum for software development? Is it better than some of the upcoming and emerging cybersecurity practices? Is it better than Lean for keeping us efficient, or better than ITIL or IT service management for managing service catalogs? Is it better than some of the more traditional organizational change management practices for improving culture? Is it better than more tools, more technology, and more automation? The answer is no. Right? DevOps is not meant to supersede, replace, or invalidate any of these practices. DevOps brings them all together. Right? DevOps improves the flow of work from idea to customer value and optimizes many of the investments that IT has made in past practices, in automation, in frameworks like ITIL or Scrum. It optimizes and brings it together, and at some level, we might consider DevOps to be a super framework. I think the key value that DevOps brings to IT is that it encourages us to apply systems thinking across the entire value stream. If you look at the gears on this slide, you can see that DevOps very much addresses just about every element that's included in the IT value stream, from idea to customer value. So first and foremost, DevOps is very much about people. We have to be able to look at our culture and invest in cultural transformation. And the reality is, culture doesn't transform, people transform. But people transform based on the way we want them to work, the way we want them to think, the way we want them to behave in your professional environment. And so we add process. But it's not just one process or one framework or one set of practices. The goal of DevOps is to apply systems thinking across all of these frameworks and all of these practices, including Agile, continuous integration, continuous delivery, IT service management, and Lean. And then we add a healthy dose of automation. Jez Humble, the author of the Continuous Delivery book, likes to say that we want to use automation to do the redundant, boring work. And we want to save people for the higher level thinking and problem solving that only people can do. So across the entire value stream in IT, DevOps is really supporting systems thinking so that we are always considering the people aspect, the process aspect, and the automation aspect. As much as DevOps considers systems thinking to be a critical approach to improving the value stream, it also recognizes that any system can only be as successful as its weakest link. And that was captured in the theory of constraints. If you've read The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, the theory of constraints is very prominent. If you've read The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, that's where the theory of constraints was born. And the theory of constraints basically says that your system will only be as weak as its weakest link. Excuse me. If we look at this value stream, we start to understand that IT is made up of many different sets of practices. And depending where we are in the software development lifecycle, or what we're now looking at as the value stream, we have agile software development and its set of practices. And then we have continuous delivery, continuous deployment. And if you look inside of continuous delivery and deployment, you see IT service management practices like change management and release management, event management, service level management. And then post-production, after deployment occurs, we have continuous operations practices, incident management, problem management, knowledge management, more service level management, and a new practice that's emerging of site reliability engineering. And at Interop, we're actually going to do a lot of focus on site reliability engineering in our DevOps track. Organizational agility can really only occur when we start to look at which of these practices is the weakest link, or in fact is the weakest link the handoff between the practices. So to kind of build on the Phoenix Project, and again, if you've not read the Phoenix Project, highly encourage you to do it. It's a business novel, more of a fable, where you'll recognize most of the characters. You probably are one of the characters, but more importantly, you can put yourself inside an IT organization to visualize some of the challenges that are associated with DevOps. One of the things that the Phoenix Project has brought forth is this concept of 3 ways of DevOps. The first way is to recognize the need to control and improve the flow of work from left to right, from software development all the way through deployment and beyond into production. So we like to call that the first way, and looking at it across the value stream as left to right. But if we're going to be able to improve the flow of work, we also then have to shorten our feedback loops. In a traditional waterfall environment, feedback doesn't usually occur till we get to the bottom of the waterfall. And for most of you, you probably understand that walking down the waterfall is pretty easy. It's a little slippery climbing back up. So one of the goals of the second way is to shorten feedback loops, to make them fast, to make them frequent, and to give IT and developers and operations folks the ability to adapt as necessary based on that feedback instead of waiting till immediately before production. And we call that shift left, where we start to shift some of the practices from the left back into the, from the right back into the left, so that practices like testing, security are happening earlier in the life cycle. And then the third way is particularly interesting. It's really encouraging continuous experimentation and learning. So if we start to look at some of the organizations that have had the greatest success in DevOps, they've done it through some experimentation. They've tried things, right? They've tried introducing disruptive chaos, in Netflix and other organizations, and they've learned from it. They've understood that the only way to become a master is to practice, and in order to practice, you have to put yourself in a situation where you can practice, and you can repeat until you have achieved that level of mastery. We have to recognize that taking intelligent risks is smart, and that experimentation and learning from failure have to become part of the culture. DevOps, we use the mantra, fail fast. So it's not don't fail. It's if you're going to fail, be prepared to remediate based on whatever that failure is. So in addition to the 3 ways, DevOps is also founded on some core values. We use the acronym CALMS: culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. And so if you look at this very holistically, these values do represent many of the areas within IT, some of which we place a lot of emphasis on, and some historically we've placed less emphasis on, and as a net result, we've ended up with some cultural or automation debt. Practices like Lean, which started to gain some recognition with Lean Six Sigma, certainly with value stream mapping, and Kanban boards, are now taking a very prominent place in our value system, along with the ability to manage against data and the support of knowledge sharing as opposed to knowledge within the silos. So now that I've given you a little bit of a high-level overview of some of the practices and some of the principles behind DevOps, let's talk about how do you move from what is DevOps to where do we start and how do we do this? So pun intended, for anyone that's a Game of Thrones fan, you might recognize the map on the left. DevOps is sometimes like the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, where each of these frameworks and practices is competing to sit on the Iron Throne. And while there's a little bit of levity in my analogy, the truth is we do have this kind of territorial approach to our practices where different departments or different silos within IT have loyalties to a particular set of practices, whether it's security practices, ITIL or IT service management practices, Agile and Scrum from a software development perspective, or automation as the solution to all of our problems, right, when in doubt, buy a tool. So that's today. But tomorrow our goal in DevOps is to really increase time of flow and time to value. And we want each of these practices to travel the road together. So instead of our having to butt up or compete or which one is going to win the day, what we really want is each of these practices to travel together as partners to be able to optimize the best of those practices and at the end create some type of a custom framework that makes sense for your organization. So as I said before, culture doesn't transform. You'll read a lot about cultural transformation. You'll read a lot about organizational change management. And to my mind, that sounds very surgical. Culture doesn't transform. People transform. But people only transform when they're inspired to do so. You know, if you look at the call out on the side, you know, the what's in it for me has to be answered on a personal level as well as an organizational level. And so one of the leadership models that's really risen in DevOps is this concept of transformational leadership. Transformational leadership is a model where leaders inspire their followers, right? They motivate their followers to be able to achieve higher performance because they appeal to their values. Right? They give them a sense of purpose. They facilitate wide-scale organizational change one person at a time. So they really engage the individual on a very personal level so that not only are they supporting the organization, but they're supporting their personal goals as well. They encourage their teams to work towards a common goal. So they help them recognize what is the vision, what is the goal that they're working through. They improve the communication. They're great role models. They set good examples, and they show that they really care about their followers' personal needs. Now, it's a little different than servant leadership. Servant leadership really inspires people to look at it from more of an organizational perspective, so they serve the team so that the team can support the organizational goal. In transformational leadership, that's certainly a key element here, but the personal side of it, where we recognize that individuals need to understand where are we going, what value do they contribute to the vision, and what will success look like for them and for their organization. So I like to think the first how-to is how do we grow people to be more multidimensional. If we're going to start to think systematically, then we also have to have people that can support the system with multiple skills. So today and historically, most IT professionals have a specialty, right? So whether you're a software developer or you're an infrastructure person, you're a QA person, most of us have been born into IT or have groomed our skills to establish some type of a core specialty. And so we're called I-shaped people because we really do have a single focus, and our organization has built teams and silos where we put specialists together into a single team or a single silo. Most Scrum teams are composed of software developers. Maybe a QA person is invited to participate, but most Scrum teams are teams of I-shaped people. They're specialists. Well, moving forward, we want to evolve those I-shaped people into at least T-shaped people, where they have a specialty, right? They still maintain their core competence, but they also have broad general knowledge. So they have depth of knowledge of one or more specific areas, but they also have a broad range of breadth of knowledge about many different competencies as well. So we create these multidimensional people by instilling in them a sense of lifelong learning, right, where learning becomes a lifestyle, and we encourage them to grow their skills not only in their specialties, so not only in how many different languages can I develop in, but also to give them a broader base of skills, say in testing. You know, test-driven development is now going to be a key element of continuous integration and continuous delivery, where testing occurs much earlier in the software development lifecycle. Well, a developer doesn't have to replace a QA person in terms of depth of skill, but they do need to have a broad enough understanding of testing in order to be able to test their code in the earliest stages of the life cycle. So they have to have a broad range of knowledge about testing, about infrastructure. Security is shifting left, so certainly developers have to have a broad understanding of security practices and security testing. So we're grooming this next generation of modern IT professionals to really be curious and to be able to grow those skills beyond just their I-shaped specialty. And if we do a good job, those T-shaped people will eventually evolve into pie-shaped people where they have two specialties and still a broad base of knowledge. And going forward, who knows what the future lies? We may end up with cone-shaped people where they have multiple specialties and still a broad base of knowledge. So if we're going to really start thinking systematically, then we have to be able to groom people to be systematic as well, and that means they have to be able to work in different environments with different types of cross-functional skills. So while many of you listening may assume that my how to do DevOps or where to start starts with building a tool chain, the reality is it all starts with learning. Right? Learning in a DevOps environment has to be a lifestyle. Unlike other frameworks where there's a single body of knowledge or a set of 5 books and a very, very definitive approach to how to do Scrum or how to do ITIL or how to audit against COVID, in DevOps being built on a collective body of knowledge, right? In today's environment, going to a book to tell you how to do something is a fairly outdated concept. Today's knowledge comes in a lot of different resources. Today's knowledge comes to you via YouTube videos or presentations at a conference, certainly still books, but there are great blog articles and case studies and thought leadership and subject matter expertise that's readily available to the market in order to be able to create this collective body of knowledge and to make learning as a lifestyle where it isn't just read a book and become an expert, or read a book or learn a tool and suddenly your learning stops. So learning as a lifestyle is very, very important. We at DevOps Institute encourage the collective body of knowledge, frankly because DevOps is so big, so broad, and it touches on just about every aspect of managing and operating an IT environment that it would be very, very difficult to not only encapsulate it in a body of knowledge, it would be extremely difficult to keep that body of knowledge current. So we look at updated presentations year over year, an organization that presents its case study at a conference and tells us how the last year went. We look at practices that emerged not in a book, but emerged because somebody inside an enterprise devised something new. I'll reference the Target Dojo, where teams check into a Target Dojo for 30 days with real work and are nurtured by Agile and Lean and DevOps cultures. Their automation is built as a part of it. That's something that somebody inside of Target thought of. It wasn't captured necessarily in a book. So we have to start making learning a lifestyle where we encourage people to be curious, because the most curious people are the most innovative, and the most innovative are the ones that create disruption inside their organization, but most importantly inside their vertical. So the where and how to get started also means that as an organization or as a team, you have to start embracing some of the emerging DevOps practices. Some are more complex than others. So if we start to look at value stream mapping as a starting point, where there are sound practices around how do you identify all of the activities that it takes to go from an idea to delivering value to the customer. And so if you start to map your value stream, right, not your software development lifecycle, not your service lifecycle, but your stream of value, and then collaborate with other teams to identify what activities they contribute to the value stream, you can also see where there are constraints that need to be overcome or at least mitigated in order to deliver value faster and more efficiently. And so part of the value stream mapping exercise is to identify redundant or wasteful activities so that you can overcome some of those constraints. It's a great activity. There are a lot of facilitators that are available that can come into an organization and help you map your value stream. DevOps Institute recently introduced a course for our partners on value stream mapping. There are books that you can read. There are presentations that you can certainly resource, but it's a great starting point. Then we, of course, look at continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment, and that's where you really see the rise of automation. You see platforms like Jenkins, and you see all of the myriad of automation and tools that are available within an IT environment, some open source, some not open source, to be able to cobble together the tool chain that can help handle a lot of the redundant work and still provide evidence of controls. So starting with continuous integration, where many of your software developers code independently and then commit their work to a central server where it's built and tested right at the start, and then moving that through a release process where it goes through different stages of a continuous delivery or a continuous deployment pipeline. Good starting point is to start to assess what tools you have today and what tools you might need to acquire or customize going forward. Site reliability engineering, I'm not going to mention too much about that right now. We are going to do a big focus on that at Interop ITX in 2018. It is not technically a part of DevOps. It actually is emerging in parallel to DevOps based on a book written by several individuals from Google in terms of how they keep their systems reliable. It is a practice to pay attention to, particularly if you're on the operational side, because it does engage the infrastructure people, the systems people, the higher level support folks, and essentially it's about engineering for reliable operations. So if you have not heard of or been exposed to the Google book, it's a great read. You're not Google perhaps, but there are some really great practices that are associated with that. Automated testing. So, I mentioned before about continuous integration, delivery, and deployment. And a key element of any continuous delivery pipeline is adding an extra layer of continuous and automated testing. Right now, your testing may be done manually. It may be a downstream activity handled by your QA department. But, as I said before, developers are now being encouraged to do test-driven development. And as it moves from a Scrum team and into the continuous delivery pipeline, testing happens all along the way. In fact, testing is pervasive throughout continuous delivery so that when the product, whether it's 5 lines of code or a feature or a function goes into production, there's a lot of confidence that it's very stable and fairly defect-free because of the amount of testing that occurs. So really embracing understanding about automated testing and what kind of tools are available to be able to really manage your test cases and produce evidence of good testing, whether the test fails and has to go back to the developers or the test goes forward, is a key element as well. DevSecOps is recognition that while we talk a lot about DevOps and development and operations working together, there's another factor in the form of security. We really need to embrace security practices as a part of the value stream, but also as a partner in DevOps. So the concept of DevSecOps, where the security practices are injected into continuous delivery, continuous deployment, but more importantly injected into the culture of the organization, is really on the rise. I mean, I would tell you in the last 6 months, we've heard more about DevSecOps and some of the practices that are coming out of emerging organizations than we have perhaps in the last 12 months. And then finally, an interesting practice known as Chatups. If you're familiar with Slack channels, you have some exposure to Chatups as a practice. but you also then get to have instant engagement with other members of IT, whether operations is engaging with developers are engaging with security, but really leveraging that kind of instant access. And it's more than instant messaging. It's really allowing you to bring the environment into the chat. So whether you're bringing in code or you're bringing in a dashboard or you're bringing in a file, it really does create a much stronger, much healthier engagement so that problems can be solved much more quickly, or interaction and knowledge sharing can be done on a very, very active basis. There's some great Chatups tools out there, but it is a practice that many organizations that are successful with DevOps are engaging. I would be remiss if I did not recognize the importance of automation. I mentioned it a few minutes ago when we talked about continuous integration, delivery, and deployment, but automation is really probably the single element that will improve speed and consistency, because truthfully, automation, if authored well, will perform the same task, the same test, and the same delivery or deployment time after time, because it has no other input, perhaps, or no other distraction that humans might have. So really being able to enable agility, to be more consistent, to provide speed, to be more reliable. And for those of you that may be in a regulated environment or those that are under audit, to provide better and more consistent evidence of controls. You can't beat it unless you're going to bring in automation. Caveat there is that automation alone is not going to get you successful DevOps. You may gain some progress, but in the long run, it won't be successful if you don't address the human aspect, the process aspect, and the integration with other frameworks like Agile or IT service management as well. But there's no shortage of tools in the automation space through DevOps. There is, in fact, if you Google it, a DevOps tools periodic table that mimics the periodic table of elements. This is really a very small sampling of some of the tools that are out there. But the coolest part about the tool chain within DevOps is, first of all, the interest and the openness of open source software. Open source doesn't necessarily mean free, right? There's still work that has to be done. Excuse me. But there is also a focus on specialties. So we have tools that do certain things that plug into other platforms so that you can create a recipe within your tool chain made up of multiple ingredients. There isn't a single way to automate your pipeline. There are lots of ways. And there are some good reference architectures out there from companies like CloudBees or Sonatype and others that will at least get you started. So to sum it up, if I leave you with any message today, it's encouraging you to start somewhere, right? Where do you start? You start with a small experiment, right? Start with a low-key, non-business critical application perhaps, with a willing team, with a team that has a lot of interfaces with other teams or other specialties. And then experiment, right? Experiment, learn, and continuously improve so that your organization can learn from its experience and then move forward slowly, steadily, and methodically, right? Don't start by building the world's biggest tool chain. Don't start with creating 90 APIs. Don't start with trying to transform the culture of your entire organization. Start small, and then experiment and grow forward as well. You know, the most important continuous is continuous improvement. And so while we focus very heavily on continuous delivery or continuous deployment, the most important continuous of all is that of improvement. So as I promised at the beginning of today's session, I want to give you a little sneak peek into the DevOps track at Interop ITX conference in Las Vegas at the end of April. So I'm not going to go through each of these individually, but we have a really dynamic group of speakers for this track, and we're covering a very wide variety of topics within DevOps, from skilling to culture to specific practices like site reliability engineering, and then also looking at KPIs and metrics and security and lean techniques, and then also touching on some of the automation that's emerging within DevOps. I'm really proud of this track. I think that it's an awesome group of speakers. The organizations they represent is huge. We have folks from LinkedIn and from care.com, so we have a large practitioner representation here as well as some speakers that you might have heard before or are known as DevOps stars: Rosalind Radcliffe, Andy Mann, Rob Hirschfeld, Anders Wahlgren. I mean, these are folks that have spoken at a lot of different conferences and have some great thought leadership to share. So I hope you'll join us at the Mirage, April 30th, for Interop ITX. We really are looking at bringing the DevOps voice into this conference. So I want to thank everybody for spending some time with me today. Very much appreciated. I hope you'll come to www.devopsinstitute.com and join our free community. And so, Peter, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great, Jayne. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your expertise on today's topic. I'd like to thank our audience as well for joining us, giving us their time and attention. Before you leave, though, we'd like to direct your attention to that webinar survey that I mentioned earlier. It's available at the right of the presentation window. If you close the survey earlier, you can reopen the widget. To do that, just click the icon that's along the bottom of your screen. Thanks in advance for filling out this feedback form. Your participation in the survey helps us to serve you better in the future. This webinar is copyright 2017 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Information Week and Interop ITX, and the speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of Information Week, I'm Peter Krass. Thanks for your time, and have a great rest of your day.